40 days. That's how long it takes to make a game engine. Just kidding. Round about 40 days is how long I had to make a game engine. Let me tell you the story. The year was 2015. 2015. That's like 9 years ago. It's almost been a decade. I was a wee lad. I just turned 20. I just started working at EA. Early March 2015. So I would have been about 6 weeks or so into my job at EA. My first ever professional software engineering job. My first ever job working on a game engine. And I really enjoy doing game jams. I mean, I still do. And I still do the same one that I used to do back then, which was Ludum Dare, or Ludum Dare. I'm always gonna say Ludum Dare. I'm sorry, community. That's how it is. It's Ludum Dare to me. It's just, that's how it is. What can I say? Nobody's perfect. Now this Ludum Dare game jam, the way that I used to do it is I used to do like the compo variant. There's compo, there's jam, now there's extra. But back then, compo and jam I think is all there was. Compo was the kind of more traditional, I think, hardcore. I don't know if it's hardcore. Probably is hardcore by today's standards because people are soft. But the compo variant meant that you got 48 hours to build a game from scratch. You had to do it solo, and you had to publish all of your source code and assets at the end of it. Now, immediately the first thing that comes to mind is from scratch, like define from scratch, because like it has to end somewhere. I'm not gonna go and build a CPU and then hardware and execute it on that, am I? So what exactly does from scratch mean? And I believe the definition of from scratch is it's very much like a from scratch asterisk. Like I feel like it's changed over the years, probably. I imagine it has to because Ludum Dare has been around for a while. For me, from scratch always meant without using tools, or at least excessively using tools to facilitate the actual art of game development. When I first discovered Ludum Dare and programming, really, I was 16. For whatever reason, games to me primarily seemed like computer programs. Maybe because I'm a programmer, but I wasn't back then. I am now. And so this concept of from scratch, like to me, kind of meant opening a blank text file and typing code in. Now, obviously that in and of itself doesn't give you much information because I could open a blank text file, type a Unity script, and then execute it in Unity. I mean, I probably have to like drag and drop some stuff in the editor, but that could be from scratch because I did it in the blank text file. However, I have a whole game engine behind me executing the code that I've actually written. So that's clearly a very different definition than if I had written this in assembly and then executed it on like a x86 CPU or something like that. But anyway, I was fascinated with the idea of being able to create things from scratch just by writing some code and making like graphics appear on the screen and being able to write code that would respond to certain user inputs. And it was just amazing to me back then. It still is kind of magical if you think about it, but I think as we grow older, the magic fades. So that was the more traditional compo version of Ludum Dare. The other version, which is Jam, is a bit more permissive. You can work in a team. You have 3 days instead of 2. You don't have to publish like the assets or the source code. The Jam variant is one that I've only ever done recently as part of Studio Cherno with my team members.
A couple of weekends ago, me and the boys did a game jam called Ludum Dare, or Ludum Dare.
But back in the day when I used to do it, it was always the compo version. But even back then, because I guess I'm not that old, back then there was a problem with the way that I used to do it. And the way that I used to do it was I used to open up Java back then and literally just using the Java libraries and sometimes OpenGL, I would write the whole game from that starting point. So I wouldn't use any real like game frameworks or libraries. I wouldn't use any game engines. I would just write the whole thing from basically a blank Java project. And again, as I mentioned, there was a sort of magic to that I really enjoyed. Man, talking about this is making me really want to do that again. Maybe not in Java, but anyway, this story time with Cherno is always get away from me. Funny how like 10 minutes recording into this video, I still haven't gotten to like my first point. I need like a director standing right here telling me no. The problem with doing it that way, fundamentally, was that the rise of the game engines, that was the problem. The fact that like, you know, people would use frameworks in the beginning, people would write little helper libraries even for themselves, like they would write them themselves, they would use them, but they would also use other people's frameworks. People would use something like libgdx, I remember in Java, which was a lot more than LWJGL, which was just like an OpenGL wrapper with a windowing library. libgdx was like a full-on kind of game and graphics framework. So that was like a stepping stone up because people who used that had a big advantage. Instead of having to program, say, OpenGL shaders and pipelines and a renderer and everything that you wanted to actually make a game, you could just be like, draw me a mesh, please, and I want to add a light here. Clearly, that's like a whole different ballgame, and people who are going to write the game from scratch are going to be at somewhat of a disadvantage. Now I have to stop here and pause for a second, not for a sponsorship message, by the way, because that's what it sounded like even to me. I just wanted to pause to acknowledge the fact that like games at the end of the day obviously are art. And if you do in fact have 48 hours to make a game, there is no reason why you can't make a better product from scratch than someone using Unity. It entirely comes down to the artist. But I hope you can understand my point that generally speaking, someone using Unity or that libgdx framework or something like that versus someone doing it from scratch, like that's not really a fair situation, is it? Again, I think it's totally fine to argue the point that a skilled person from scratch could probably make a better game than an inexperienced beginner, using Unity. But I always had the thought of, if I had a better starting point, then maybe I could make a better product within those 48 hours. And so, around 40 days before Ludum Dare, I don't remember which one it was, the one I guess in April 2015, I decided that I would try and make somewhat of a game engine. Written in C++, which I don't think I'd ever done at that point on my YouTube channel before, really. And I had only just really started using C++ in a complex, professional way at EA working on their game engines less than 2 months before this started. And so I sat down and I decided to make a game engine and I called it Sparky.
Hey, what's up guys? My name is Cherno and welcome to the first video, the intro video for the Sparky game engine series. So this is going to be a brand new series in which we create a game engine from scratch. And the primary purpose for this game engine is going to be for Ludum Dare.
I then ended up using that game engine to create this game for the Ludum Dare competition. So I did end up completing some sort of framework to use as like a starting point for the game jam so that I wouldn't have to start completely from scratch. Did it help? That is a question I never asked myself until now. 9 years later, I'm asking myself the question of, did Sparky help me in that game jam? I don't know. The game that I ended up making, as terrible as it was, I think I could easily have made that in Java, just using Java's standard graphics, like built-in graphics API and library within the 48 hours, and it possibly would have actually been simpler. Because if I recall correctly, I had to compile that C++ code into like JavaScript, I think, using mscripten because I wanted to publish it on the web and then figure out how audio, I think, was going to work with that. And there were some issues with assets, and Sparky never had a scripting language, so everything was in C++. I couldn't use Java's kind of live debugging. I never really reflected back on that and thought about whether or not it had helped me achieve my goal. The goal being presumably to make a game within 48 hours, and not just make a game, but make as good of a game as possible within that 48 hours. And I think that says a lot, the fact that I didn't even ask myself that question until 9 years later. And I think that the reason why I didn't ask myself that question of whether or not it helped me to achieve the goal of making as good of a game as I could was because that was never my goal. I was always really interested in making game engines, and that was clearly being achieved. Like, the whole point of Ludum Dare existing and then me having to build a game engine within 40 days so that I could use it at that Ludum Dare, and again, use it at that Ludum Dare to make honestly, not a good game in any metric, but using that engine and shipping it using that engine, that was the excitement. That is where the passion lay. And the game has to be made though. The game still has to be made because a game engine exists to create games or some kind of interactive real-time applications. So if you don't have those, then the game engine might not really be a game engine. It might just be like a tool or a library of code that you use, but it needs to achieve its goal. A really, really random analogy that I just thought of. I've been getting these like RC plane videos recommended to me on YouTube. People like go very, very hard on making these remote controlled aircraft that are like very, I guess, realistic and very expensive and very cool. I'm sure those people enjoy flying those planes. Like flying the planes would be fun. But I think the process of building the planes, testing the planes, recording the metrics of how they perform, comparing their designs with other people's designs, acquiring components, doing research, I think that is where the fun is. RC plane community, correct me if I'm wrong. I have no idea what I'm talking about. I do like planes though. And so I think that 40-day journey, that was really the meaningful part for me. Okay, so why did I make this video? For an entirely different reason than where it ended up going, actually. I was just gonna say that from today, from the moment this video is published, there's exactly 40 days left until the next Ludum Dare Game Jam begins. Here is the countdown. You can find it on ldjam.com. I intend to participate in that Ludum Dare, and for the first time in a very, very long time, I will be doing it solo. I haven't decided yet whether or not I'm going to take up the 3 days or the 2, so whether or not I'm going to do the compo because it is just me, or if I'm still going to do the jam so that I can take up 3 days. But I will be making and shipping a game and all of the assets associated with it within like the 2 or 3 days. I'm not going to be doing it from scratch, even though I talked about that for like most of this video. I'm going to be using Hazel. I think it's a great opportunity to actually use Hazel myself to make a complete game without any help from anyone else and with no collaboration. As usual, I'm gonna live stream the whole thing back on Twitch this time. And in the meantime, in the 40 days that we have up to that, I'm gonna go through Hazel. I'm gonna see what needs to be fixed or improved, or if there are any features I would like to have for the game jam. And then hopefully I'm gonna be able to get all of that done in the 40 days leading up to Ludum Dare. 40 days, that's all you need.